Have you ever just sat down with a new RPG, pressed start, and then just sat at the difficulty screen unsure of what to pick? For me, this happens often because I've learned easy often means little to no grinding, so I can play much more aggressively. Normal means a lot of grinding, hard means a ton of grinding, and super hard means half your playtime is going to be grinding. Yet, occasionally normal or hard will be properly balanced for little grinding, and easy is God mode with unlimited money. Hey, who said real life to hard mode? Let's turn this down to easy. RPGs are one of the few genres that usually have terrible difficulty options. So this video is going to focus a lot on RPG difficulty, but much of this is applicable to any genre. One genre that rarely has bad options are platformers. One of the biggest changes you see between platformer difficulties has to do with reducing player health, and this leads to an enjoyably harder game by asking the player to play better and get hit less. When you turn up the difficulty in RPGs, you often just see buffing their health and defense, or sometimes evasion, leading to much longer but not particularly more difficult encounters. The best argument you can make for this increasing difficulty is that it asks you to be better prepared at the item shop as enemies chip away at your resources. The problem is doing more shopping makes the game feel more tedious than difficult, especially when battles are dragging. The next most common stat to increase is agility, which sounds better on paper, but in turn-based RPGs can lead to more instances where certain enemy parties always act first and can wipe your party before you can do anything. That's not hard to me, that's obnoxious. In the instances where developers buff offensive stats, things work better, but multi-target attacks can get absurdly, unintentionally strong. On the surface, it seems next to impossible to have multiple enjoyable difficulty levels in RPGs. Maybe we can find solutions in other genres. Some of the other genres where choosing difficulty can be complicated are fighting games, puzzle games, and party games. Some games on max difficulty, they will do all the work for you. Other games, they read inputs. The problem and solution here is pretty obvious. Don't let them read inputs or have single frame reaction times. The last notable genre I found difficulty problems in are FPSs, a genre I'm not that much of a fan of. The difficulty differences I most often see are more enemies and/or enemies that take more hits. In practice, both of these usually lead to longer, but not more difficult encounters. You double up one of the stronger rare enemies? Yeah, that can get hairy. You just throw in 10 more of the basic fodder or make them take 5 to 10 hits? I've made like 500 of them retire from being alive. More of them is just wasting my time. The big problem I see in bang bang games is very small enemy pools. Even when I drop to easy to improve the pacing, the basic enemies have worn out their welcome before the halfway point. FPS devs, make more enemy types. Make them go down in 1 to 3 hits, no matter the difficulty, unless they are armored. If an FPS hero hit you, unless they hit an arm or a leg or an ear, you're gonna be down, or getting up confused why your body isn't working right. Focus on what enemies synergize rather than throwing an extra body to replace any enemies that take a long break from living. Or maybe RPG gamers just don't get FPSs. For most RPGs, reading inputs or having fast reaction times wouldn't help or hinder the enemy. RPGs has some of the largest bestiaries, so that shouldn't be the biggest problem. Increasing the encounter rate is also not going to affect difficulty as much as wreck the pacing. Turn-based or hack-and-slash enemies going down in 1 to 4 hits if you are appropriately leveled probably is applicable though. Neither current enemies or players should be taking 10 plus hits before having to heal. Another thing to consider if you crank up agility is a mechanic that lets the player interrupt turn order, like those seen in Trails or Xenosaga. Those times when the enemies get to decimate a helpless player, now the player can cut it short and try to turn things around. One of the biggest hurdles in balancing RPGs is guessing where the player's stats are, making adding additional difficulty levels harder and more time consuming, so I don't think messing with enemy stats are ever the best solution. Let me tell you a story of my most enjoyable hard run, in a game where you probably missed the hard mode option. On my first playthrough, I thought Mario and Luigi Partners in Time was a mid-game. But on my second, I noticed there are two sets of armor. One boosts defense and is the obvious pick, and the other boosts attack and lowers defense. Considering Mario & Luigi is an RPG where you could theoretically take no damage, thanks to the active dodge system, I decided to use these glass cannon overalls. Enemies were going down in just a few hits and I had to be on my A game or take heavy damage. Some of the enemies are tricky and gave me trouble, and I'd have to put someone on healing duty. So it became vital to get initiative and use Bros items wisely to control those tricky enemies, so I'd have fewer chances to mess up the timing. The final boss was a quick but harrowing battle of nailing the Bros items and mastering reading and dodging her attacks. What I take away from that is the secret to an excitingly difficult RPG is giving the player as much agency as you can, and giving them the option to make themselves into glass cannons. It's simpler than most devs try to make it, though another of RPG's stumbling blocks is how much they take away control from the player. Ideally, developers should steal the timed hit, defense, or dodge mechanic. And that actually lends it well to difficulty levels. Make easy so you just have to press the button around the time of impact, and hard where it has to be within a couple frames of impact. At the least, developers should be mindful of times players can lose agency. Enemies that spam party-wide status effects or attacks can bring encounters to a painful crawl, especially if the player doesn't have access to anything to block the status or reduce damage. I've found more enjoyment in games that have mostly AoE or splash attacks. Party-wide statuses can be obnoxious and tempt many players to spam party-wide attacks, and optimize any fun or thought out of the game. The final secret is difficulty isn't what makes a game feel exciting, that's engagement. The feeling the player's choices and play matter. Paper Mario may not be hard, but it feels more exciting than many other RPGs, especially using glass cannon builds. Even though super guarding is far from hard, the consequences of messing it up are certain death, with the reward being a power trip on your next turn. The most fun hard games are ones that make the player feel like they will lose if they mess up, even if it would be hard to mess up. This applies to other genres as well. Players should be paying attention and actively engaged, and they will perceive the game as challenging. Wasting a player's time is not a form of difficulty. It is a form of making your game hard to play. There's a reason lives and game overs are rare now. In most games, they are just a time waster. That being said, every genre is different, and the best practices may vary. As diverse as my gaming tastes are, there are some genres I've never touched, like point-and-click strategy games, dating sims, or some other simulators. What tips do you have from your time playing for creating engaging difficulty options? Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. It helps. You've heard it from every YouTuber, but it helps.
Oh, my spleen!